Hello, this is Terrence McNally. It's a little over 3 weeks to what has long been called Election Day. And this year, with the pandemic and Trump and the Republicans' aggressive efforts to suppress the vote, you want to vote well before Election Day, whether in person or by mail. If Trump leads on election night, he will claim victory no matter what the remaining uncounted votes might say. Here's my December 2018 conversation with Billy Wimsatt, founder and executive director of Movement.vote Project. Instead of throwing your money at big consultants and big TV ad buys, MVP helps progressive donors move their money instead to the best local, community-based organizations in battleground states. Money invested in the grassroots wins elections and makes change. You can learn more at movement.vote. Hello, I'm Terrence McNally, and welcome to another newly recorded episode of Free Forum, A World That Just Might Work. And I'll be speaking today with Billy Wimsatt. He's the founder and executive director of Movement.vote Project, or MVP, which helps progressive donors to support the best local, community-based organizations in key states. And you can learn more about their work at movement.vote. And let me just start off by saying that after a 3-year hiatus, I've been doing new interviews every other week since Trump's Electoral College victory. The original show, Freeform, goes back to 1996, which is kind of mind-blowing to everybody. But since, as I said, since Trump came back in office, I started doing interviews again. Paul Hawken on climate change, Naomi Klein on her book No Is Not Enough, Arlie Hochschild on her book Strangers in Their Own Land, about the stories that divide us. Robert Wright on why he's a Buddhist. Sometimes it's not all politics, but it's how do we stay sane in this current environment. And the show airs as specials on KPFK 90.7 FM in LA and streams weekly on the Progressive Voices Network on TuneIn. And podcasts are available anytime, anywhere on iTunes, Podomatic.com, and at my site, terrencemcnally.net. That's TERRENCEMCNALLY.net. Now, a quick plug for participation. In addition to Movement.vote, I always like to give you ways to stay involved. Indivisibleguide.com is probably the biggest national organization that emerged after the Trump election. And I think they now have at least 5,000 local chapters around the country. OurRevolution.com grew out of the Bernie Sanders campaign. MoveOn.org has been around since the Clinton impeachment, believe it or not. But since the 2016 election, MoveOn has gotten more. It's a digital activation platform, but it's gotten more involved with the grassroots. Same is true for CourageCampaign.org, which is a digital platform now working closely with grassroots organizations in the state of California. And so I basically say elections only happen every 2-4 years. Civics, being involved happens every day, every week. We know the recent midterm elections saw the Democrats take over the House, win a lot of races in state houses across the country, and the analysis of what worked and why will roll out over the next few months. But one organization whose strategy clearly contributed is Movement.vote Project. As I said, it's a tool that helps progressive donors find the best grassroots vote groups you've never heard of in all 50 states, but especially in key states like Florida and Ohio, as well as a peer-to-peer campaign to shift money from TV ads to local groups doing grassroots vote work. In 2018, they moved more than $13 million to 350-plus groups in 42 states in almost every competitive U.S. House, Senate, governor's race, and ballot measure. And this is a clear break from the tried-and-true beltway strategy dominated by big donors, big consultants, and big TV ad buys. My guest today is the founder and executive director, Billy Wimsatt, and we're going to talk about how they came up with their approach, what they accomplished in 2018, what they learned, and how they are already off and running for 2020. Billy has 20 years of experience in journalism, social entrepreneurship. He co-founded several organizations, including the League of Young Voters, Ready for Warren, and Rebuild the Dream. He's worked in philanthropy, co-founded Solidaire, and consults for individual donors and family foundations, and has done political consulting for the Obama campaign, for MoveOn.org, for Rock the Vote, and Green for All. Welcome, Billy Wimsatt to Free Forum, A World That Just Might Work. And let me tell listeners, we're recording this interview Tuesday, December 18th, 2018. Welcome.
Aaron, thank you for having me on. This is so exciting.
Yeah, I must tell you, as I shared with you just before we got on the air this morning, I was listening to the call that movement.vote shared with all of its people from the various states. So you're sort of wrangling the call, and then you'll call on, okay, Michigan, Texas, and then these folks from and not from this one monolithic movement.vote, but folks from whatever the local group might have been in Austin, Texas, or Detroit, Michigan, or Raleigh, North Carolina, or the folks that did the ballot Proposition 4 in Florida to get felons who served their time the right to vote again. And just listening to it, Billy, I was caught up in the excitement, and actually I found myself tearing up at times with with the way with the way that you're approaching it, and the passion and the success that people had in 2018. So
thank you. It's so funny because I don't do a lot of interviews. I used to get interviewed a lot when I was a young graffiti artist, and when I wrote books like Bomb the Suburbs and No More Prisons. People were like, oh my God, we want to interview you. We want to write our dissertation about this. It's so interesting. And I feel like the work I do in the world now is probably, like 100 times more effective in actually changing things. But it's not as exciting as, as kind of like being a big out there, charismatic artist, talking a lot of smack about changing the world. So it's when's the last time you had a philanthropic advisor on as a guest?
True.
On your show? It's not something that anyone thinks is like an interesting thing that you'd want to talk about. So yes, I'm excited.
Okay. And I like listeners, I did a little bit of your resume, and you just shared a little bit about your past, but I want listeners to get to know the people behind the ideas and the work that we talk about. So can you, in your own words, tell us a bit about your evolution, and feel free, you can take your time, feel free to mention mentors, turning points, moments of decision. How did Billy Wimsatt end up as this philanthropic advisor I'm talking to?
Yeah, it was never like something I planned to be when I was younger. Yeah, I mean, I grew up in Chicago. I was an activist, and at a young age I was really involved. I grew up in the 80s in hip hop, and I was a very bad break dancer, a very serious graffiti writer, and then I started writing for all the rap magazines, about Chicago hip hop, and then about politics and organizing and race. And I wrote this book, Bomb the Suburbs, when it came out when I was like 21, and I hitchhiked around the country, and I started meeting all these organizers all over the country, or activists, and all these kind of interesting people would come out to my talks, and I was like, wow, there's this whole network of people. And then in the 90s, I wrote No More Prisons, and then More of the Same, and I got hired by Rock the Vote to be their national, quote unquote, their national talent scout. They were gonna, they were gonna put some activists on MTV that didn't just vote, but that rocked the vote in between elections, which was my jam because I actually didn't believe in voting. Even when I worked for Rock the Vote, I didn't vote. It was like a point of pride. Like, if that doesn't work, like the system is rotten, and I don't believe in just like voting for stupid politicians, And so I built this, first the list. It was like 500 groups in 50 states, and then I got involved in trying to move them, trying to support them. Like, I fell in love with these groups, and I was like, I don't want to just be a journalist. I want to help the movement. How do we build a movement? And that was really the guiding question of my life. It's like, I read about the 60s, and I was like, why don't we have a movement? Like, what's up with the hip-hop generation? What's up with my generation, like, why don't we have a movement? And how do we build one? Because we needed a movement to change everything. Because, I grew up in Chicago, like, with friends on both sides of the tracks. And so, I started losing a lot of friends, and I was boiling with anger. Like, how do we change this? And so I was, like, looking for answers. And one of the things that happened, actually, it was like a year after I was written No More Prisons, and I was doing all these, like, speaking all over the country. And I came back, and I was living in Raleigh, North Carolina. And we had a little organization there. And one of my interns came in. I'll never forget this. This is like the biggest turning point story of my life. 2 weeks before the 2000 election, right? And again, I was like not interested in Bush versus Gore, like that's just a bunch of, BS fake politics. We're doing the real politics, stopping prisons, right? And then what happened was my intern was like, hey, do you know there's a ballot measure to double the size of the Wake County Jail, which was our jail? And I was like, and I felt like really embarrassed. I was like, no, like when is this? It's in 2 weeks, so we called around to every organization, like, is anyone working on this? No one was working on it. And so we said, oh my God. So we got together, we had an emergency meeting that night. We said, we started a fake organization called Citizens for Safety. And we printed, we only had like $1,000. We printed like zillions of posters that said schools yes, jails no. And which there was a school ballot measure too. We put them all over the town, and then we were like, oh my God, we have to learn how to get out the vote. How do we do that? So we were like, and on election night, we actually ran a pretty good GOTV campaign. We made it like a big issue. It was out in all the newspapers and stuff, and TV. And then we lost. We were going around my living room. There were like 20 of us debriefing, and I thought everyone was going to be demoralized. We lost narrowly. We were outspent like probably 200 to 1.
Sure, the prison industrial complex has money.
Yeah, you think, and so we went around the room, and every single person was like, that was incredible. Like, how can we do? When can we do this again?
Oh my God!
And I was like, oh my God, elections can be cool. Like, elections can be. And I realized, there are always going to be things on the ballot that no one's paying attention to, like building a new jail, or prosecutor races, or judges, or things that affect people's lives that we're not paying attention to. So my friends and I started something called the League of Pissed Off Voters, which over time became the League of Young Voters. But the idea was you make your own local pissed off voter guide, and you say, like, because no one knows how to vote down ballot, right?
Yep.
It's like, especially on like judges and local ballot measures, is it good, is it bad, And so we made our own voter guides. It's like, this one's, a piece of crap, and this, and like real talk to like actually, because we try to like tell 19-year-olds to go vote for the first time, and they go in there and they feel completely disempowered. So anyway, we had this model, make your own local progressive voter guide. We had like 60 groups around the country, and it was exciting. We helped swing a bunch of local elections. Some of our people started running for office and getting elected, and then and then I went and did a bunch of other things, and then so I came back to it in 2012 because there was still a gap, and there was there was a huge gap, and so I started a new version of that same organization, basically called Vote Mob, like flash mobs for voting. And we, since then we've hired probably 1,000 people in about 40 battleground states to get out the vote, on college campuses and in just communities that are neglected, right? And so while we were doing that, this was another turning point, and this is what led to creating movement.vote, is in the 2014 election, people would donate to Vote Mob, but then some of them would ask me, hey, and there were like Senate races in places like Kansas and Alaska and Iowa, and they're like, are there any groups in those states that we can donate to?
Mm.
And I was like, yeah, we actually like partner with all the local groups there when we do vote mobs. So I made a Google Doc, just like the
Yeah.
Indivisible folks. It all starts with a Google Doc. I made a Google Doc of the best local groups in these places, and I circulated it around, and like hundreds of thousands of dollars moved to those groups just because the Google Doc getting around. I was like, wow, this is actually a niche. It's like an unmet need, because like if you're in California or New York or wherever, and you're like, okay, I know we need to get out the vote in Florida or Michigan, or wherever. I may or may not like the candidate. I may or may not be excited about the Democratic Party. But here's a way that we can get out, young voters of color and other, progressive voters, and not just, give it to a candidate, but give it to communities that are going to build their own power before, during, and after the election, like groups like the Florida Immigrant Coalition or Ohio Student Association, or, just groups that are building power and changing things in their own communities. Exactly the kind of movement groups that we all want to build bigger, especially in communities of color and with young people. But there's, how do you go about donating to those groups?
Right.
How do you know what they are? How do you know what's what? And so we basically made like a good housekeeping.
Right.
We and I already, was in relationship with a bunch of these groups, but I didn't stop there. We've talked to over 100 experts and like other funders and organizers, and we're constantly updating the list. It's now 500 groups in almost all 50 states that both do election work effectively and do year-round organizing in their communities on the issues we care about. So, so if you go to the website, you can search, you can say, I care about climate and the South and women of color leadership or whatever, and then you can find groups that match your interests and you can donate to them. You can also, a lot of people are like, we also have curated funds, so there's like a Native organizing fund and a Muslim fund and a Black fund and an immigrant fund and a youth fund and a climate fund. So people can just do like a one-click option. We're just trying to make it easy, and build the brand of local organizing and local electoral work so that regular people, don't have to just donate to a candidate who's emailing them 16 times. These are groups that are never going to email you, right? They're never going to call you. They're never going to bother you.
That's right.
They
don't have the staff to do it.
Yeah, that's right. And that's why they're going to use your money more effectively.
Yep.
Right?
I think I first met you, God, it might be several years ago. But what struck me even then was the point you make that people who only pay attention to politics or government as dictated by the media or as dictated by the two major parties are working at this level that really is all about elections, all about consultants, all about ads, and all about money. And what we know is that the life of communities, the life of groups within communities goes on between elections. And what you guys have hit on is that when you're funding someone to work in an election, there's someone who will work the day after the election and the day before the election too. And so the very nature of that is such a different animal.
Exactly. I'm thinking back to all these incredible stories. Like my mind is filled with just all these incredible organizing groups. So let me give an example of how this works. So there are now 6 Senate races that we've had a major impact on. Democrats have 47 votes, unfortunately, in the Senate.
Yeah.
But without these 6 Senate races that were collectively decided by only 144,000 votes, we'd only have 41. Democrats only have 41 votes.
Wow.
Without, and so just to tell the story of the kind of first one we worked on in New Hampshire. There were these 4 groups that no one's ever heard of. One's called RAD, another is called, Granite State, I'll give their C4 name. Anyway, we gave money to these groups. We also hired an organizer who was supporting all of them to build up their programs. We also sent hundreds of volunteers there. And the Senate race in New Hampshire in 2016 was decided by 1,027 votes.
Oh.
And these groups had collectively knocked on 185. They knocked on. We moved them about $180,000 collectively, and they knocked on 85,000 doors. And these weren't, and I live in Massachusetts right now, so a lot of people go up and volunteer, and you know what their experience is? They're like, oh my God, people are so sick of hearing from us. Because they go and they use the list from the Democratic Party, and they're knocking on the same people's doors and bothering them.
Yep.
These groups were not knocking on those doors. They were knocking on the doors of unlikely voters who were not on all the lists. And so these voters were saying, oh, thank you for coming to visit me, you know? And where do I vote? And when is election day? And who are the candidates? So it's when you do this really deep community-based voter organizing, it's a completely different experience. So anyway, that was the first Senate race. Then in 2017, and this is
now,
the one.
by the way, let me cut in for a second just to make a couple of points. One is that in terms of using your resources well, I hear right away we've got, as we know, a state with a population of 500,000 has the same number of senators as California with 35 million. And electing a senator in New Hampshire is just as powerful as electing a senator in California, New York, Michigan, Florida, but it's a much smaller fishbowl. It's a much smaller contest. Your $185,000 could actually have decided that race, since it was decided by 1,000. So I think this kind of perspective that people have to get is that there's efficiency here. There's ways to use your resources well. And the other thing I was going to say is what you said about the likely voter and the unlikely voter. I will tell you my experience. I first worked in a campaign in 1972. I was 24 years old, and I ran an assembly district in California for the McGovern campaign. And
wow.
And I had, and it was funny, Billy. It happened to be an assembly district that had no junior college, no college, and no affluent neighborhood. So most of my canvassers were high school kids. I would call up the local high school and I'd say, if I can get a Nixon guy to come and debate me, or a Nixon spokesman to come and debate me, can we have a debate in your high school? And they go, sure. And then I'd call the Nixon people and I'd say, can we go debate in this high school? And then we'd go, and I would end up, of course, I'm the young 24-year-old, ending the war. I would end up, grabbing volunteers, and that became, I called it our children's crusade, because almost all our volunteers, and that was the first year there was an 18-year-old vote. So it was quite exciting. But I have canvassed, a little bit ever since, and it is exactly what you say. I get a printout. It's the list of likely voters. It's the same list Planned Parenthood has. It's the same list the Sierra Club has. And so those people are, for the most part, they've been spoken to already, and they're bored, and you're annoying them. Whereas when you go for the unlikely voter, you're actually informing them. Listening to that call I mentioned, Billy, I heard, one of the folks from one of the states saying one of the things we learned was that people didn't know the difference between the state legislature and the National Congress. People didn't know that that we elected local prosecutors. People didn't know these things, and they said our work going forward to 2020 is going to start with education about these things, because we didn't realize we didn't realize how little people knew. And what you say about someone going into the polling booth and looking at a ballot, and what that ballot says to them is, you don't know enough. right? It has names they don't know. It has posts they don't know. And so the message sort of
Yeah.
is, you're not really qualified to be voting here. Whereas if you can get people educated, now it becomes something where they have the power and they feel it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, okay, so this is making me want to tell another story, and this
Go
is
ahead.
maybe my favorite story of people who didn't know they had power, exercising it. So this is something everyone will remember. The special Senate race in Alabama in 2017, which was completely a long shot, completely an uphill battle. No one politically at the national level had invested in Alabama. Everyone thought it was kind of a done deal until Roy Moore had, all his scandals started happening, and even then it was considered a real long shot. And reporters were going there a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks out and saying, black voters are not motivated to vote for the Democratic candidate. And, black voters are not excited about Doug Jones. He has a problem. Well, what they didn't know is that 8 weeks out, I was in conversation with two really extraordinary black women from Alabama who, the first, Joanna Thompson, started an organization called Woke Vote, and Latasha Brown, who started an organization called Black Voters Matter. And we moved them, first $10,000, $20,000, and then a bunch of us together, over the course of a couple months, moved them about $600,000, and they hired over 600 organizers in 17 counties in Alabama and re-granted money to 35 local organizations that, in the Black Belt, that were getting completely ignored by the campaign. And they turned out, the historic black voter turnout exceeded white voter turnout, and Doug Jones narrowly won. And then, but we didn't stop there. Said these are brilliant.
Yeah.
And they both said, let's expand this model throughout the South, and everyone was clamoring for Woke Vote and Black Voters Matter to come to their states. So then we helped invest in them, going to more states, going to Tennessee and North Carolina and Florida and Mississippi and everywhere else. And now, Black Voters Matter is almost a household name. They're all over the media, and so we're just our job is to find the brilliant organizers, before the New York Times finds them, and get them the resources to make their dreams happen in a way that is both deeply transformative for their communities and wins critical elections.
Hello, this is Terrence McNally, and you're listening to my December 2018 conversation with Billy Wimsatt, founder and executive director of Movement Voter Project, one of the most effective election fundraising organizations I know of. Can you share a story about a big donor, perhaps, not necessarily with a name, but who hadn't ever thought of doing it your way, and how this experience had, because I would imagine, were I a big donor and I had been, funneling it the same old way, and suddenly I did this, I would imagine I also, just like I was saying the individual voter feels more empowered, I would imagine the donor also feels like they're actually finally making a difference, having leverage, and so on. Do you have any stories like that?
Yeah, I mean, in addition to the local organizers who are often unsung heroes, the donors are so often unsung heroes who get no credit, and who, I mean, there's so many people who, either, have foundations, and their foundations have only ever moved money to the environment or to arts or to women and girls empowerment, and suddenly we're getting all these calls, and they're like, hey, we hear you can help people figure out how to invest, legally in voter registration and in supporting organizing in communities of color in key states. And the thing is, we help them for free. And people almost can't believe that, because basically some people who we helped were like, oh my God, this is so great. You have to help everyone do this. So we're kind of in a unique situation that we don't have to raise money for ourselves. We're basically giving people the level of service that you pay someone, $100,000 plus to be a high-level program officer, at a foundation. We've already done we have better research than any program officer, so we can help people who are giving, all different levels of money for free to get that service. So yeah, there's so many examples. It's hard to think of one. Yeah, okay. So here's one. So there's a guy in tech, who maxed out to Hillary and was doing stuff for the kids' school. Had never really given like huge donations before, and had just never occurred, because most people, it's like, they kind of have two sides of their brain. There's political giving. It's like, oh, there's a candidate, there's Bernie, there's Beto, there's Stacey Abrams, I'm going to give to them. And on the other side, it's like, oh, I'm going to give a donation to my kid's school or to yada yada organization that mailed me a letter, And it's never occurred to most people that they can use both tax-deductible and non-tax-deductible money strategically to invest in key organizations that are getting out the vote and actually often have a bigger effect than giving to the candidate. So, so this was a donor we talked last year, and they ended up moving hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Whoa.
Through these groups, way more than they'd ever given before. Because this is a worldwide emergency.
Yes,
it's an unprecedented situation, and and I'm gonna go into soapbox for a second. It's like, if you think about 2020 election, November 3rd, 2020 to be exact, we're all gonna wake up. We're all gonna go to victory parties or watch parties that night, and what happens there and what happens the next morning, it's not just the next 4 years of our life and our country and our world, all the judges that are getting appointed, this is a generation, all the effects on the climate. So I heard someone say, and I think it's wise, if you have, X number of money to give away, and, a lot of people who are listening are like, I don't have money to give away. What are you talking about? But, a lot of us know people,
That's
whatever
right.
level, actually a lot of the best voter organizers are undocumented folks, right, who can't vote themselves. Or, a lot of the best people who move money don't have money themselves, are people who are just passionate and share it online and, use their influence with others to, to spread the word and say how important it is. Right? And so, or to go volunteer or to do any number of things. But what I'm saying is, y'all, this is it. Like, there are a lot of important things, but if we don't get this one thing right, we are screwed to the moon for the next, I have kids. I have young kids, and I think about this a lot. Like, what is the world going to be like that they grow up in, my 1-year-old and my 5-year-old? And I look in their eyes, and my 5-year-old's starting to learn about this stuff. And, this is it, folks. Like, if we don't do this one thing right, everything is screwed. Like, nothing is more important than this, and it doesn't mean we shouldn't be doing all kinds of important things. There's important, DA race and prison work in LA to do, locally and in every local community, in 2020. But everyone needs to make a plan for the next 22 months. Like, what can you do? What can you give? Who else can you influence? Like, this, if you ever think about a time in history, slavery or, whenever, that you could go back and make a difference, there's no moment, when people look back 10 years from now and 50 years and 100 years from now, there is no moment that people are going to rather go back to than 2016 when we lost by 77,000 votes in 3 states.
Yep.
3 states, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, 77,000 votes. If we don't invest in every corner of every county of those states, of building progressive organizing, same thing with Florida, same thing with a couple other states, we're asking for the same thing to happen again. Like, if you think about the 2020 election, the most likely scenario is that the Democrat is going to win the popular vote by, 3 million, 5 million in California. That doesn't matter in the Electoral College. Sorry.
Yep.
And, it's going to be a razor-close race again in Michigan, Wisconsin, Florida, Pennsylvania,
Ohio,
and maybe a couple other states. Yeah. And it could come down to a couple thousand votes, just like that Senate race in New Hampshire did, just like so many other races we've worked on that flipped either way by a couple thousand votes. And I just don't want to have any regrets. Like, this is happening now, and most people make the mistake of waiting until, next July, next August, next September. We can't wait. We have to invest in buildings infrastructure right now.
That's right. The day after the election, they either cry in their beer or they give a sigh of relief, and then they go, so I don't have to think about that for a year and a half. And the point that you're making, and that I heard you make on your call, and that is basically what's resounding through your organization is no. 2020 starts now, while you've got the enthusiasm, while you've got the list. And one thing you point out is that the norm. It's not like it sometimes happens. The norm is that groups that can be very, very effective in organizing for an election will have to lay off lots of their organizers between elections because suddenly the money dries up.
It's happening right now.
And in fact,
right now.
That's right. They're laying them off now. Now, those people have to go get jobs, so they go get another job. Now, 12 months from now, when people start waking up and thinking, whoa, we got to beat Trump, and they start putting money into this stuff, that person's got a job already. That great organizer you had, now he works for somebody, and he's making a living, and he can't afford, and she can't afford to come and work for you. So what you're saying is the 2020 election starts now. And the funding has to keep flowing. And what you point out, I think, is that even in states where the Democrat or the progressive lost, like Texas is an excellent example, where Beto came much closer than anyone could have dreamed, but lost. But what happened down ballot, what happened in county races, what happened in the legislature, that is a shift that has momentum. And if people can keep investing, and I don't think I can say it, but you can say it, one way to invest in Texas is to invest in movement.vote and keep those organizers working starting now, then that purple wave, if you will, has the possibility of, instead of dying and having to start again, of keeping moving. And as you point out, the organizations that you fund are not just doing elections. They're also doing organizing about prison issues, about gender issues, about education issues, and so on. So your money is going to, be doing good between now and 2020, but you want to keep alive the movement that can actually win in 2020. And as you point out, the number one race you're working on is the presidency, but the Senate is a really a huge challenge. Talk just a little bit about the Senate and what you're looking at towards 2020.
Yeah. So our first priority right now. Well, actually, let me just back up.
Sure.
So if you think about the next 18 months, it's basically going to be a big Democratic primary that is going to be the main thing on people's minds for the next 18 months. I'm already exhausted by it. It hasn't even completely started yet. And, there's going to be a lot of kind of back and forth with the horse race.
Yep.
Kind of like the Hillary-Bernie thing times 18.
Yep.
And so people can either engage in that, or we're giving them another option, which is whoever wins, we need to have the strongest field operation in Wisconsin, in Michigan, in Pennsylvania, in Florida possible to inherit, to make sure that we win. And just to give one granular example, and then I'll come back to the Senate. So in Wisconsin, there's this really innovative idea. There's a group called Wisconsin Citizen Action that builds what they call organizer co-ops, right? What's an organizer co-op? It's you get 250 people in a place like La Crosse or Eau Claire or, mid-sized city. You get 250 people to each donate $20 a month. And then those 250 people get to hire an organizer who's their organizer, right? And then it totally shifts the dynamic, in those towns, right? And in those counties. And so we just help them. They're just starting an organizer co-op in Southwest Wisconsin, which is one of the areas that had the most Obama-Trump pivot counties, right? So we want to help them, start 4 or 5 more all over the state. It's basically something like $400,000 or $500,000 in kind of startup costs to get to the point where it starts to pay for itself. I mean, if you say, that sounds like a lot of money, right? Compared to like the impact it can have on the future of the world, it's nothing.
Yeah. Right?
So we have to think about things in perspective when we're thinking about this. So moving on to the Senate, our definitely like number 1, 2, and 3 priority right now is get resources to those critical states to build and expand in the way I just talked about for the presidency, because we know what those states are. Mm-hmm. It's not mysterious.
That's right.
For the Senate, it's a little bit of a moving target. Like, we know Colorado is going to be a huge target. We know Alabama is going to be a huge target. And then depending on the candidates in other states, so just to say what the math is, so it's Democrats have 47 seats to 53 right now, right? Republicans have 53. So if things play out as one would expect, there's a decent chance Democrats will pick up Colorado. That's 1 seat. Gonna have to fight for it, but there's a decent chance of a pickup. Honestly, there's a more than likely chance that we'll lose Alabama, right? We have to fight for it.
Let me point out one thing about that, just so people think about it. Whenever you win a really close election, and whenever you win in an area that you haven't won before or for a while, for instance, how Orange County, people have heard how Orange County, which had long been a Republican stronghold, every congressperson out of Orange County, California, coming from the 2018 election, is a Democrat. Well, while you're going, oh, isn't that great, and you're cheering, what you know is that those are the most vulnerable candidates the next election. In other words, it was a surprise they won. It was a demographic shift. It took enormous organizing. It maybe took a scandal, on the loser's side and so on. But the very fact that you won something they didn't expect you to win means it's going to be even harder to win it again, because whatever the entrenched power was that got used to winning and took it for granted, now they know they've got to fight. And so the hardest elections to win are the ones you won in a close election previously. Alabama being, like the absolute example.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And then, okay, so let's pretend we pick up Colorado, we lose Alabama, we break even on those 2. So Democrats need at least 3 more seats or 4 to be able to. Well, let me talk about the implications, and I'll come back to the state. So, and I actually think there's a lot of excitement this time about the House. People are like, the House. We're going to win the House. We can win the House. And I'm like, but what about the Senate? They're like, I don't know if we'll win the Senate. I'm going to focus on the House. I'm like, are you effing crazy? Like, do you understand how this works? if you don't have the Senate, you don't get to appoint any judges ever. We don't get to replace Ruth Bader Ginsburg. We don't get to, the court is being packed with right-wing judges right now. And if we don't both win the presidency and the Senate, we're going to be the court is going to be right-wing court for a generation. And, you can kiss the climate goodbye, basically. So yeah, we have to, and all of these states I'm about to name are going to be uphill battles. And we can't say, and ditto for Alabama, we can't say, oh, that's too hard, I'm going to do something else. We have to throw everything we have got to pick up those at least 3 or 4 seats, and honestly, we have to work our tails off, and invest early and differently and get good kids and get lucky. We have to hope for some luck in there somewhere too.
Yep.
And so the states that may have competitive Senate races are North Carolina, Georgia, Iowa, Alaska,
Arizona, Michigan,
yep,
New Hampshire.
Arizona, yeah. And a lot of these states are going to be perennially. So even if we don't win in 2020, we got to invest everything we can in North Carolina. And Arizona, I think we're now considering a real presidential battleground state as well as a Senate state. Yeah. I think it proved itself this time. So we're going to throw down in Arizona and North Carolina, both for the presidential and the Senate, and ditto for Georgia. And even if we don't win, we have to just be keeping investing with everything we've got in those states, because if we don't win a Democratic senator this time, we have to try to win it the next cycle or the next cycle after that. These are the states that are most trending in the right way that we have to keep investing in.
Yeah, and people just have to remember, every congressperson is up every 2 years. Senate is staggered. There's 2 senators in every state. They up for election every 6 years. So you build a good organization in one of these states, and you lose in 2018, but then the other senator is up in 2 years or 4 years. You fight again. Maybe you win that time. And it's building vital, vibrant, sort of living organizations that ultimately makes the difference. And in that old calculus that we were talking about at the start of big consultants, big money, big TV buys, they just divided up the country and said, these aren't worth fighting over. We don't have to work here. We don't have to work here. And what you guys are about, because when you look locally, that calculus doesn't make any sense. When you look locally, you got to get policies that work in your congressional district, in your county, in your state.
That's right.
And because that affects people's lives. And in doing so, you then create, as I said, sort of living organizations that can shift things nationally because there's the life and the vitality on a local level. Let me tell people, by the way, this is Freeform, a world that just might work. I'm Terrence McNally. I'm speaking with Billy Wimsatt, founder and executive director of Movement Voter Project, MVP, which helps progressive donors support the best local community-based organizations in key states, and you can learn more at movement.vote. We've got about 10 minutes, Billy. I would love it if you could backtrack just a little, and you have a few concepts that you use as the lens in your work, and I think it might be helpful to people to sort of see what it is, how you decide what groups you're going to target, what makes sense to you, because you look at maps, organizations, voters very differently than most folks. So what are the lenses you use to choose how to do your work?
There are a bunch of different layers that we apply to make recommendations. And by the way, we make recommendations to, everywhere from huge donors who are giving, $1 million to people who are trying to figure out what they want their $5 a month to do.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and by the way, the money does not go to movement voter projects. You know, when you said something about if you want to affect Texas, you can give to MVP there. You know, what I know you were really saying in shorthand was
yes,
you can give through the Movement Voter Project site directly to these groups. 100% of the money goes to the groups. We do not take a cut, which is one of the cool things. All the money goes to the groups. So, but actually, let me back up.
yeah,
So the first thing we do is we don't BS people about the political map. We're very hard nosed. You know, you got a lot of emails of like, you know, from people saying like, this race is important and a poll said this. Like, you know, don't believe, you know, just whatever people are selling you on that stuff. You know, like at least look at the aggregated polling in 538, and even oftentimes that can be really misleading. Like right now, Cook Political Report has Alabama as lean Dem, which is ridiculous. You have to actually like factor in a lot of different things to look at the political map in a no BS way. So we look at the political map, we look at all the aggregated polling and the fundamentals and listening to what's going on with candidates in real time, and then we say, okay, like so based on that, our top states right now to invest in are Florida, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona. Those are like basically the top 5, no matter what, to invest in, with a small side order of New Hampshire. You know, and then there's a big tier 2, but that's tier 1 right now, right? So the first thing we do is look at those maps, and then we say, how do we build the infrastructure in every county in every one of these states? How do we build? So then we do an organizational analysis, and we're talking to all the organizations, we're talking to all the intermediaries that support the organizations. We talk to them all about themselves, about each other, and we get a pretty real picture of what capacity groups have. You know, like maybe last cycle a group registered 50,000 voters and turned out 200,000 voters in 4 counties in Pennsylvania. What can they realistically grow to? What do they need to grow? So we do deeper organizational assessments with them, and what we're telling groups in those states is dream big. You're about to get more money than you've ever had before. We're going to help you get that. So if you can do, you know, can you go up, you know, can you register 60,000 voters this time? Can you register 70,000? What staff do you need? What, you know, what infrastructure do you need? Do you need to open up an office in another county, you know, in order to reach, you know, these goals? And by the way, right now we're pretty obsessed with helping people expand to additional counties because, you know, a lot of community organizations are strong in the big cities and not so strong in, you know, the small outlying cities like Altoona, Pennsylvania, or, you know, smaller places that tend to get ignored. So, you know, so we're trying to help groups expand. We're also trying to. This is really important, you know, because a lot of the way that people fund groups is actually super divisive because they focus on one organization at a time. And you're like, oh, I found the best organization to fund in Florida. You know, I'm going to fund them. And then there's all these other organizations. Organizations work as an ecosystem. It's not like, oh, I found the best left fielder, you know, I found the best player on this team. It's like you need a shortstop, you need a first base. You know, you need an entire network of organizations that can work well together and plan well together. You need a winning team. So we invest in helping people build winning teams in a very collaborative way in their states because they all have different strengths and they kind of all just grew up organically. So.
One thing you're pointing out is that they too often they are put in the position of competing with each other for funding, competing with each other for attention. And what you attempt to do is support an ecosystem in which collaboration and cooperation is crucial to actually win.
Exactly. Like we're actually trying to build a real movement. Imagine that. You know?
Yeah.
So that's the second thing we look at is the organizational landscape. And then within that, we look at what are the funding needs and where is funding already going or where is funding likely to go or not go. So we pride ourselves on giving, on understanding the organizational landscape so well in every state that when a donor says, we want to move $5,000 to, Pennsylvania, we know not that there's one place that 5,000 could go, but we know like the 10 places where it's most likely to make not just a difference, but ideally a catalytic difference. Because we actually don't just fund good groups; we actually help people to start new groups.
Mm-hmm.
To fill gaps. Sometimes there'll be like a great staffer, but they won't get along with their executive director, and they'll have a vision to go build an organization in another town or another neighborhood. We'll often help them do that, right? So that they can, people can be better neighbors sometimes than if they're stuck together in the same organization. We all know how that is, right?
Yeah, sometimes it's best to merge, sometimes it's best to separate. I'll tell you what,
exactly.
we're right at the end. So in summation, Billy Wimsatt, what should people do if they want to get involved and be more effective?
We have a couple asks. One is, go to movement.vote and check it out.
So that's movement.vote.
Movement.vote. And then we want you to not just donate, but donate and testify. Share. People watch your social media feeds. Share on social media, hey, I just donated to this thing. It's really interesting and different and yada, yada. I gave to this group in Texas, and here's who they are. Share it in your own way. We need people to do that. Secondly, you don't have to do this alone. If you don't know what to do, get together with a friend, get together with 5 friends, and figure it out together. Make a plan. Make a 2-year plan, a 22-month plan, actually, because we're going to need every talent, treasure, connection that everyone has to solve this big problem together, which is how do we make sure this Don doesn't get a second term.
Right.
So,
and
by the way,
the other piece in there is it's this ultimately that particular battle is about the Electoral College. So it's why it really is important to be strategic. It will not, as you pointed out, it will not be enough to win the popular vote by 5 million votes if the Electoral College breaks wrong. So it's and that's one thing that people can do by going through movement.vote. You can see where the energy and the money is needed to win that Electoral College vote.
Exactly. And you got to remember, there are people just like you in Wisconsin, in Florida, in Pennsylvania who need support and need money, and you might not know them by name, or maybe you do. Find your friends in those states and help them. But this is a really powerful way to support, especially communities of color and young organizers in these states that don't have all the financial resources they need, but are brilliant, incredible, ingenious organizers that will blow your minds and will save all of us.
Okay, we got to bring it to a close. Again, you can learn more at movement.vote. And for this conversation and many other interviews, articles, to join me in pursuit of a world that just might work, you can go to TerrenceMcNally.net, TerrenceMcNally.net, or aworldthatjustmightwork.com. They're the same website. If you want to receive my weekly email announcement, I'll tell you who's going to be on, what we're going to talk about, plus usually 8 or so relevant articles to flesh out the conversation. Sign up at my site or email me at temcnally@mac.com, temcnally@mac.com. You can also subscribe and listen to the Freeform podcast on iTunes. You can find years of podcasts at my site or at iTunes. Michael Lewis, Jeremy Scahill, Naomi Klein, Robert Reich, Van Jones, Connie Rice, etc. Thanks to Mark Maxwell and Teddy Andrews in production, and George Vasilopoulos at Progressive Voices. Most of all, to you, my listeners, please Share this podcast widely. Thank you, Billy Wimsatt. Keep up your good work.
Karen, thank you so much. It has been a total joy, and I'm so excited. We're going to win!